The story begins on the 4th floor of the Cork Island dungeon. Peak Sword, ranked 16th in the unified rankings, leads a team of 8 top rankers and 200 elite members of the Silver Knights Guild. There are only 5 minutes left, and with this team, they would be able to capture a small fortress. However, Pixword is very nervous. On this 4th floor, a monster boss named Helgao appears every 2 weeks. A soldier warns that there are only 4 minutes left for the raid to begin. The guild had spent a lot of time and money strengthening themselves, definitely much stronger than last time. But then, an intruder appeared on the scene. All the members turned to see the user at the cave entrance. Who is the stranger, they thought. He has a weak presence and an unimposing appearance. How did he manage to bypass the defenses of the lower floors? He was just wearing a dirty cloak. Maybe he was a highly trained assassin. But an assassin would never reveal their presence in this way. A window shows that the player's name is Grid. Although in this summary we will also call him Grid. Pixword quickly searches among the ranked users for this name, but there is no such ranking. No player knew the user, so Pixword expels him from the place. This is an area controlled by the Silver Knights Guild. I don't know how you got here, but we are about to have an important battle. If you don't want to die, leave, Pixword said. Then, the hooded figure murmurs a few words. I was worried because my stealth disappeared. Maybe it's because of Helgao's presence. Then, I wouldn't need your cloak anymore, and proceeds to take it off, revealing an imposing armor. The group was completely stunned. The armor the player was wearing was impressive, perhaps of a unique grade, and even had a tail that seemed to have a life of its own. The members couldn't look away. Pixword grits his teeth and orders the player's expulsion, but then an explosion is heard behind him. He's here. The monster boss Helgao had appeared, towering over everyone with an intimidating presence. Windows show the monster's appearance. Helgao lets out a scream that instills fear, chaos, and weakening effects. Helgao's fire also reduced heat resistance by 50%. Then, the monster uses the Fire Pillar's ability, causing a massive explosion and wiping out a large part of the group. With a single ability, he had taken out half of the users. Pixword had increased his fire resistance by 86%, but still received a lot of damage. Then, footsteps are heard, and the stranger advances through the fire as if nothing. How was that possible? He resisted Helgao's powerful flames and suffered no damage. Then, the young man begins to summon something. It was a pickaxe with which he began to dig as if nothing. Good heavens! What were they seeing? Pixword's eyes were wide open. The young man was collecting materials right in front of Helgao. He complained, "It's so hot. Why do these minerals only appear when the boss reappears?" Lost in his thoughts, the monster boss raises his scythe and points it at the young man's back, causing a huge explosion. It was a direct hit. No one would be able to withstand it. However, he was completely unscathed and, addressing Pixword, issues a warning. "Hey sir, aren't you going to do anything about him? It's hot now, but it's going to get hotter." The rank 16 thought that wasn't the issue and asked directly, "Didn't his attack hurt you?" Meanwhile, Helgao was initiating another attack, and just before his scythe hit the player, he blocked it with his tail. Pixword couldn't close his mouth as he watched the incredible scene. Grid explains that it was thanks to the item's effect, and as you must have already realized, the protagonist of this story is not Pixword, but the young man with the impressive armor, Shin Young-woo. Although we will call him by his nickname, Grid, from this scene where we introduce the protagonist and what he will become. We will take a trip to the past to learn about his story and see how and when he became so powerful. Someone is fleeing. It's our protagonist, Grid, who is being pursued by guards. Why are they chasing me, he wonders. Then, he is reached by the sword of one of his pursuers. Am I going to die here, he wonders. Fool, you abused our generosity. Your greed blinded you, even when we had an agreement, Asur says. He reveals to Grid that he never expected him to complete the mission he was given. Grid responds that he fought for months to complete it and therefore deserved a reward. Asur agreed to reward him, but with death. Grid turned around and cursed Count Asur. Here, Mon Yue explains to us that Satisfy is the best virtual reality game in the world. There are about 2 billion active players around the world. There is a multitude of content and landscapes in this game, making it seem like another world. In Satisfy, there are countless unexplored places, and this was one of them, the cave of the extreme north, the deepest zone. A location with all kinds of equipment and items stacked, patiently waiting for someone to come and discover them. Placing us at this location an hour before the chase scene. Grid, a level 73 warrior, celebrates finding an item to complete a Count Ossur's S-level mission. The protagonist was supposed to deliver the rare book of the legendary craftsman. With tears in his eyes, Grid remembered all the obstacles he had to overcome to get to this point, all for this stupid S-level mission that he couldn't even abandon. If he wasn't well rewarded, he definitely wouldn't work with Ossur again. When Grid prepared to review the item, its status appeared as unknown. To review it, he needed to use Palion's Eye. Palion's Eye, exclaimed the protagonist. This item cost about $500 in real life. How much more money do I have to spend to complete this mission? Lamented the protagonist. However, there would always be the next month to save, so he decided to buy the item. When using the eye to evaluate the item, Grid discovered that it was a legendary grade item, Pagma's book. This contained the secrets of the legendary blacksmith Pagma, and the user who used it would become Pagma's descendant. By discovering the item, the player's reputation rose by 500 points across the continent. Grid was speechless. The protagonist couldn't contain the excitement of the legendary class. With it, he could obtain the most powerful class in the game. However, he had to deliver the book to complete the mission. Who cared about the mission at this point? If he sold it on the online market, he could get billions of wands. The protagonist had many debts from the money he borrowed to play the game. He invested so much time that his friends gradually drifted away from him, and even his own family considered him a waste. But everything had ended now that he had obtained the book. Ready to sell it, Grid ordered to end the session. But then a window appeared indicating that he couldn't disconnect at this time. Next, he was notified that Ossur's secret S-level mission had changed to an SS-level mission, the departure of Isla Sur. The Count appeared with his army. Bastard, greed has blinded you, the Count complained to Grid for trying to steal the mission item. Now, the Count would try to assassinate him. However, Grid shouted angrily that the mission given to him was too complicated for the reward offered. Ossur ordered his men to finish him. But before the guard could execute him, Grid escaped. I won't die like this, thought Grid. He was a level 73 warrior. At least he would try to do something. The protagonist summoned a shield, but it was easily destroyed by the Guardian. Furthermore, the impact threw him several meters back. Even though he blocked the attack, he lost half of his health. Grid knew that Ossur was around level 300, but even his Guardians were very powerful. Grid accepted his death. But looking at his inventory, he remembered that he still had Pagma's book. Under normal conditions, it would remain in his inventory even after death, but because it was part of a mission, he would obtain it if he killed Ossur. He only had one way out. He tried to open the book, but it was too late. Grid used the item and began his class change. All the protagonist's stats and abilities were reset. Grid became the descendant of Pagma and obtained numerous passive and active skills. The protagonist loved his warrior class for fighting, but now he had become a user of the blacksmith class. This bothered him, but he thought it was worth it when he saw Ossur's desperate expression. Then, the class change was completed, and Grid obtained the title of someone who would become a legend. Unaware that he was now at a negative level, Grid was willing to kill all his enemies, but his hopes were interrupted by a sword strike. You have died. After using the book and changing his class to a legendary one, our protagonist was defeated by Ossur's knights. As a result, the protagonist's level, which had been reset to level 1, was reduced by 2 more levels. So currently, he is at negative level -1. Is this possible? In addition to dying, he failed to deliver the legendary book to Count Ossur, so from now on, he was banned from accessing the Patron region. Before disappearing, Grid dedicated a few words to the Count. You really ended an innocent, dirty thief, stealing what I deserve legitimately. Besides, it's just a game, murmured Grid. But before disappearing, he wished that Ossur would live in the worst possible way. After this scene, we were teleported to a real-world building, specifically to the room of our protagonist, who emerged completely exhausted from his capsule to play Satisfy. That was so much fun, exclaimed Grid. However, as our protagonist lamented missing the opportunity to get rich, a more fearsome monster than any other creature in Satisfy appeared. An angry mother. Do you know what time it is, son? Asked Grid's angry mother. If you have been through this situation, sign up to join our family. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, At the operations offices of the Satisfy SA Group, a supercar arrived at the entrance. The head of the Satisfy operations team came down to greet the game's lead developer, who incredulously asked if someone had really managed to change classes. "It was just 5 minutes ago," she said. "It sounds fun," exclaimed the president. At headquarters, the head of the operations team detailed the player's report. His real name is Shin Yonghwa and his character's name is Grid. He was level 73, but currently is at a negative level. He obtained Pagma's book through Count Osir's secret mission and, according to the information department, he is an unemployed, uneducated game addict. Over the past 3 months, he has explored numerous times, dying several times in the process. Although we were instructed to carefully examine the legendary class he just obtained, it seems that he obtained it legitimately through his obsession and determination in the game. The developer praised such persistence from the protagonist. However, the head of the team found it very frustrating that this happened by mere chance. But the lead developer responded that he found it fun because, according to his calculations, the book should have been found 2 years ago, and Grid not only obtained the associated mission but also found the extreme north cave. This mission location could not be a coincidence, but rather Grid's effort to not give up like other players. Besides this minute possibility, the lead developer also realized that the protagonist's negative level, which initially seems like a disadvantage, is actually an advantage, as when he rises to level 1, from where all players start, he will have superior statistics to the rest of the players, as he will have risen 2 levels to reach level 1. The head of the team reacted quickly. "We must quickly correct this to avoid unbalancing the game." However, the president expressed that we should not give it too much importance, as the descendant of Pagma is relatively weak in combat compared to other warrior classes. However, after saying this, the president realized something. Returning to the protagonist, he was receiving payment for his real-life work while the rest of the workers judged him. The protagonist chose to ignore them and leave with the money. He looked and smelled bad, and his work was very poor, the protagonist heard. He lamented in a park. He really had no talent, and his situation was terrible, both in real life and in the game. He would have to start from scratch, but he decided to try again. Grid went back home and entered the capsule to log into Satisfy. "Even though I've lost everything, I'm curious about the legendary class I obtained," the protagonist murmured. No matter what he had to do, he was determined to make money. Grid was transported to the world of Satisfy, appearing half-naked in a strange forest. "What the hell? Where am I?" Grid wondered, surveying the area. It seemed to be in the Patreon region, but in an unexplored area. The protagonist searched for some sign to help him locate himself when he heard something. Grid noticed a scream coming from a strange tower in the middle of the forest. Inside, there was a girl lying on a cross, while strange figures dressed in robes uttered words in a language he had never heard before. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual. What the hell is this place? Apparently, Grid had entered the Temple of Yaten. Upon realizing this, a shiver ran down Grid's body. My goodness! Temples are usually places for players above level 150. I should get out of here, Grid thought. He opened his status window, which, in addition to showing his new class and title, indicated his current poor condition. However, upon reviewing the new abilities he had obtained, he came across a very interesting one. All items can be used, but other penalties will be applied outside the item restrictions. Grid had to test this, so he equipped his old armor and sword. It seemed that the ability worked, as Grid could use level 60 items, despite being at a negative level. The power to use higher-level equipment was accompanied by a significant increase in the protagonist's basic statistics, although restrictions for using higher-level equipment soon appeared to dampen his spirits. It didn't take long for the sword's attacks to be reduced by 30%, while the armor's defense decreased by 20%. Nevertheless, he still remained infinitely superior to the items he could use for his current level. It was at this moment that Grid realized how fantastic this new class he had unlocked was. However, a thought invaded his mind. If this dungeon is level 150, it means that everything around this area is at a similar level. A scream interrupted his thoughts. If this is the Temple of Yaten, these strangers must be followers of Yaten and seem to be in the middle of some ceremony. The level of these mages is much higher than what Grid currently possesses, so he is no match for them. However, it shouldn't be a problem if he leaves without being discovered. It was at this moment that someone touched Grid from behind. His first reaction was to strike with the sword. "Easy, kid. Are you trying to kill me?" whispered the unknown person. The stranger removed the hood and introduced himself as Doran, a secret guard under the orders of Count Stein. Apparently, he had come to rescue the girl lying on the altar, who was Count Stein's daughter named Irene and had been kidnapped by Yatin's followers during her vacation. "It's a complicated situation, but it's good to have someone on my side," said the guard Doran. Grid was about to reject the proposal immediately, but a new mission appeared: rescue the esteemed daughter of the Count. Reward: 3,000 gold and the opportunity to become the Count's son-in-law. If you fail, you will lose 2 levels. Damn it, another S-class mission, Grid thought. Doran thought that our protagonist must be a very powerful person because, in this situation where they were outnumbered by so many men, he remained steadfast, without a hint of fear. Grid found it strange and reviewed his passive abilities. Composure. The probability of falling under an abnormal condition is drastically reduced. Recovery speed is increased. Wow, Grid would have to take a look at the rest of the abilities later. It must be my lucky day. It really comforts me to have the support of a warrior like you, poor Doran thanked, unaware of Grid's situation. But if I don't go help no, the protagonist refuted. Faced with this response, Doran tried to insist once more, but the protagonist's answer remained negative. Doran was surprised by Grid's coldness and tried a little harder. The protagonist did not want to lose the 3,000 gold that the mission offered, equivalent to over 3.6 million Korean won, but, being logical, it was foolish to accept another S-class mission. Amid the heated discussion, Grid accidentally pushed a rock that fell on a follower of Yatin, killing him and triggering the mission to rescue Count Stein's daughter. Then, Doran joined him. Now they would have to face these dark mages if he didn't want to die. Doran offered to clear a path for the protagonist to rescue the young Irene, but there were many dark wizards. To make matters worse, due to the restrictions, Grid's current statistics were comparable to those of a level 34, so he had no chance against so many Yatin's followers. While lamenting his pitiful feeling, he was saved by Doran, who seemed to be very powerful, quickly dispatching a group of wizards with his daggers. This surprised Grid, and an idea crossed his mind. With him by my side, maybe I can survive. However, he immediately regretted that thought when overwhelmed by the number of enemies. Outnumbered, Doran reasoned that the best idea was to descend directly to the altar, so he pushed Grid. "I'm dead!" Grid shouted at the top of his lungs. But before hitting the ground, the guard used the levitate skill, surprising Grid. Although grateful to Doran for saving him, they were now right in front of the enemy. Yatin's followers began casting their spells, and facing a possible enemy counterattack, Doran dispatched the mages before they could finish their incantation. In response, some followers threw themselves against the intruders to buy time for the wizards. Meanwhile, the protagonist was no match in this battle, so all that was left was to cheer on the NPC. However, this had the opposite effect, distracting Doran, who was hit by an enemy spell. The only option left for Grid was to switch sides. "Actually, I've always wanted to become a servant of Yatin," murmured the protagonist. The black mages had prematurely sung victory, as the guard resisted the dark magic, surprising both Grid and the enemies. This time, however, it was Doran who attacked, but his attack was repelled by a shield. "Today is my lucky day," Grid was surprised to hear a female voice. Another player had appeared. "My S-class mission is to protect the ritual at all costs." "I was afraid of how far they could go, but my opponent is an NPC named Doran," the girl said, excited. "I haven't felt this emotional in a long time." "I'm Yura. May I fight you?" she asked. It was Yura, known as the Blood Witch, the #1 player in Black Magic, and 5th in the unified rankings. She was a very famous Korean player, both in the game and in real life, often appearing on television. Why the hell is she here? Grid wondered. Yura launched an attack that our protagonists narrowly dodged and asked our protagonist, "Are you the one who accepted this S-class mission? Thanks to you, I can test my new ability without the cameras seeing me. Although it will be a tough fight for you." Yura thought that Grid would be around level 80 after seeing his equipment. On the other hand, our protagonist was already facing difficulties with the level of the NPCs in the area, but now that a ranker had joined them, he was really in trouble. However, he had the powerful Doran by his side. Even though she was a ranker, it wouldn't be an easy mission. Yura began to prepare another attack, wanting to test how powerful she was now that she had reached level 230. Our protagonists, in turn, were on high alert. Doran moved quickly and attacked the mage, but fell into her trap and was immobilized. He then used his blades to free himself from the traps and then attacked the ranker. Yura easily dodged the attack and attacked Doran again, having him exactly where she wanted. This time, she activated a spell that drained the guard's blood, leaving him in critical condition. The protagonist couldn't do anything in this situation. Yura had to use 30% of her mana to use this ability and finish off the NPC, but it wasn't the end. Doran managed to survive. He was using a very powerful item. This left the ranker speechless, as he had used the level 220 Mesmerize ability, obtaining unlimited defense against enemy attacks for a certain period of time. The protagonist asked in surprise, "Are you okay?" "Yes, thanks to this ring and its ability," mumbled Doran, tired. "It should protect me from your curses and speed up my recovery." It was an incredible item, so he asked her to give it to him, but it wasn't time for jokes, as they were facing a formidable opponent. The guard attacked Yura again, who thought about preparing an attack to eliminate both of them once and for all. However, she didn't know how powerful the other warrior accompanying the NPC could be. Despite using low-level equipment, he was in a high-level area. Grid couldn't afford to be distracted for a moment, as the Yatin they had previously defeated were reappearing. Yura took advantage of the distraction to launch her most powerful attack, depleting all her mana reserves to finish off both at once. "It's over," lamented Doran. With an attack of this caliber, they couldn't survive. However, the protagonist stepped forward to protect the NPC. The attack caused a huge explosion in the tower, but Yura was certain that they couldn't resist such an attack. Far from reality, they were alive and well after receiving my spell. Who the hell is this guy? There was no way Yura wouldn't know such a powerful player. It was then that she realized that it was thanks to another feature of her new class, specifically the ability "A Legend Does Not Die Easily," whereby when health drops, the protagonist becomes invulnerable to all attacks for 5 seconds. A very broken ability. Yura, in turn, remained completely bewildered, as she believed she was at level 80, but survived her most powerful attack without a scratch. It seemed that she was starting to feel something for Grid, as from her point of view, it seemed like the protagonist was smiling warmly at her. This opportunity was seized by Doran, who, using Grid as a springboard, rose to counterattack the Dark Mage. However, Yura still had an ace up her sleeve and would protect herself with a defensive spell. The ranker, however, had to react quickly and finish off the unknown player before it was too late, but when she looked at his location, there was no sign of him. He simply disappeared. What the hell is this user Grid thinking? It left both allies and enemies bewildered. From the protagonist's point of view, in reality, he died again, losing 2 more levels in the process. And as punishment for dying twice in less than 24 hours, he would be denied access to Satisfy for the next 12 hours. Let's replay the scene to find out what really happened. When Doran propelled himself onto Grid's back, he caused damage to him, reducing the protagonist's health points to 0, ending the player's life. "It was all this NPC's fault," grumbled the protagonist, returning to see the outcome of the fight. The ranker thought that Grid was giving her the mission as a gesture of sympathy, which she didn't like. "I swear I will find you and never forgive you," Yura thought. The protagonist was very angry, blaming Ranker for interfering in his mission, so he entered the game forum to seek revenge. That's when Grid wrote several negative comments to discredit the player. It seemed like a new defender of the neighborhood had been born. The protagonist's ecstasy was interrupted by someone. It was his sister Shin Siege, asking what her older brother was doing to be so agitated. Grid's room was a mess, which worried his younger sister. As she approached to see what her brother was doing, she read Grid's comments. He apologized, saying it was unintentional, but ended up disappointing his sister. "Is everything Yura's fault? Is she also trying to ruin my life outside the game?" thought the protagonist, accusing Yura again. The next day, Grid was home alone. His parents and sister had gone out. He had a simple plan: to have breakfast while watching his favorite news channel, Satisfy. A new idea popped into Grid's mind. If this guy can become famous, can I also get rich? That's when the announcer talked about the Yatin Tower, which was completely destroyed the night before. Grid seemed to have an idea of who could have done it. The announcer had been investigating and all the evidence pointed to one person, the ranker number 5, Yura. Judging by the ruins, she must have had a very intense battle. There seemed to be a testimony from a player who witnessed the scene. "I was running away from a monster when I heard a noise coming from the tower. Yura was fighting a guy and cast her best spell. Yura is even more beautiful in person, the fan said for everyone to hear. But the result was so surprising that even Yura was left speechless, as the guy didn't have a scratch after the spell's impact. Yura was fighting a top ranker? Exclaimed the announcer. But the fan of Yura was crushed by a rock, so he couldn't see his face. Have I become famous? Thought Grid, confused in his house. This can only mean that I'll get rich. Grid quickly grabbed his phone, called the news channel's inquiry center, and exclaimed that he was the user who fought Yura. They asked for his name and level, but when Grid mentioned being level less than 3, they immediately hung up. How would they believe me? The last thing they knew about the temple was this image. It seems that in the end, Doran had to sacrifice himself to save Irene. Even though he was an NPC, he was a good person and had a very interesting ring. After closing the chapter of the Yatin Tower, they started interviewing a rising player, Cats, level 203. I guess everyone already knows who I am, exclaimed the arrogant player. Grid had heard of him. He was a famous arrogant boy, the son of the head of a large corporation. The interviewer asked Cats how he reached the top 53 so quickly. The user mentioned that he had gained 30 levels in 3 months, which surprised Grid, as it took him several years to reach level 70. Before answering the interviewer, Cats wanted to take the opportunity to challenge the Korean ranker Yura. This is the end of your era. I will be the next top ranker, said the lunatic. Grid thought that, even though he was top 53, he didn't stand a chance against the top 5. Although Grid also didn't like Yura, she was a monster on another level. After Cat's declaration of war, he exclaimed that his rapid advancement was due to this sword. He then activated a skill and modified the sword. It seemed that he had a passive ability that modified the sword he used to give it vitality in exchange for more attack damage. The more vitality he absorbed, the more attack he would have. He obtained this ability thanks to his epic class called Warrior's Blood, 1 level below the legendary class that Grid possessed, but it was also a hidden class that few could obtain. This excited the protagonist, who was eager to learn more about his own class. Determined, Grid returned to the game and appeared in the Bairan village. Clearly, he couldn't reappear in a destroyed Yatin temple. In this village, there seemed to be many players recruiting members, although the level requirements were very high. Amidst the shouts, he heard a player looking for members above level 200 to search for blue or chalum, the strongest mineral. All the members sought had to be above level 100, so Grid reappeared in a high-level area. That's when he saw a carriage. It was his opportunity to go to a beginner's village. But when he asked about the cost of the trip, they asked for 10 gold coins. Grid had nothing, so he would have to find another solution. Now, Grid had a new class, the descendant of Pagma. He began to review his skills to experiment. It seemed that he could increase his statistics and reputation by creating items. Furthermore, it seemed that he had mastered the skills of a blacksmith. He had legendary blacksmithing at level 1, while he had already mastered the rest of them. It was something amazing. The main blacksmith had barely reached the intermediate level of blacksmithing skill. One of the abilities that Grid possessed was creation. He had his own production method with the help of the system. Thanks to the legendary blacksmith skill, he could create 3 items of that class for each level he gained. Currently, he could design 3 items. The television object was epic, but a legendary level 1 would be much better. Therefore, Grid activated the legendary blacksmith skill. He planned to make a sword for hunting and leveling up. The system asked about the materials he would use to create the weapon, and he remembered that they mentioned that blue orichalcum was the best material. So, he would design his sword using that mineral as a base. Now he would have to design the sword. A window appeared for him to paint how he would like his sword to be. He was very excited and started adding unrealistic statistics, such as 10 million in attack statistics and the ability to summon meteorites. He wanted it to look like a shark, and in the end, it looked like a mix between an anchovy and a shark, but our protagonist liked it because he created it himself. A new window appeared. The system automatically calibrated the statistics according to the design and materials used. The weapon statistics would be adjusted and corrected to be realistic. Grid had created plans for a fantastic weapon, with over 1,000 durability points and almost 2,000 attack points, as well as increasing agility by 50 points. Even though the statistics he input were adjusted, it was a sword like no other. However, the conditions for using the weapon were ridiculous. It was necessary to be at level 300 or higher, have over 5,000 strength, and have advanced sword mastery at level 8 or higher. This was madness, as the top unified ranker had barely reached level 250 recently. It was an item that no one in the game could use, however. He could use it thanks to his skill, and even with its limitations, it would still be very powerful. With the plans ready, now he just needed to obtain the mineral to create the sword. When he asked to join the group, he was directly rejected, as it was for level 190s and the protagonist seemed to be at level 60. Grid lied, saying he was level 100, and although he used lower-level equipment, his control was very good, so it didn't affect him much. From his appearance, they knew that the protagonist was probably lying, but before they could expel him from the place, another player arrived and said that his group would take care of the fight. Thus, Grid could take care of other things. It seemed to be the reign of the first place, the ranking of martial artists better known as Sacred Fists. The boy's level was 180, but in his class it was very difficult to level up, so it was an achievement. The protagonist thought he was lucky to be strong and handsome, but he was supporting him. So, he would swallow his words. "I could even take care of the cleaning," exclaimed excited Grid. The companion did not seem convinced, so they decided to test the protagonist's skills in a one-on-one fight against Regis. Grid was scared, so he quickly fled the scene, as he did not want to die again. Remember that in the previous chapter, Grid could not join the raid to obtain the mineral for his sword. Regis thought it would have been good to have him on the team and wondered why he left. Now the protagonist would have to resort to his initial plan of the carriage. But first, he would have to get some money. At that moment, he received a notification to name the object he had created a short time ago. He could not obtain the material, so he named it as a failure. Now that he knew he could create limited items, he would only design them when necessary and when he had the resources. This is the first video on the channel, the first of many, and for an excellent debut, bringing you a wonderful work, Overgeared. Leave a like so I know you liked it and bring the continuation of the anime here. If you don't want to miss the next releases, subscribe and leave a like. This is very important to us. In addition to the comments, which generate engagement for the channel, I await you in the next Nerd Recap.